Good afternoon, and welcome to the session on providing retirement security to caregivers and workers in a changing workforce. I'm Kilolo Kijakazi, and I'm an Institute Fellow at the Urban Institute, and this marks my 20th year of working on retirement security issues. One of the challenges of improving benefit adequacy is determining how to tailor the Social Security system to fit a changing society. We have substantially more women in the workforce now, and yet we have the continued need for caregiving, not just for the young, but also for those who are aging and ill, family members who also need care. We also have a growing presence of contingent workers who don't have the benefit of some of the traditional kinds of coverage and benefits that workers have had in the past. And we have an ongoing concern about discrimination in the labor market, which persists and results in higher levels of unemployment as well as longer periods of unemployment for some workers. So to help us address these challenges using innovative solutions, we have two distinguished guests. Christian Weller is Professor of Public Policy at the McCormack Graduate School of Policy and Global Studies at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. And he conducted his research with Derek Hamilton, who is an associate professor of economics and urban policy at the New School. Christian will present work on expanding, qualifying credit options for Social Security benefits. And then we also have Debra Whitman, who is the Executive Vice President and Chief Public Policy Officer at AARP, and this Innovations Challenge was her brainchild. She'll present on adding pre-retirement benefits into Social Security. And she conducted her research with Mark Friedman and Jim Emmerman of Encore. So without further ado.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you to Nazi for inviting me here. Thank you for AARP for sponsoring this project. This was a collaboration, as Kilolo just said, with Derek Hamilton from the New School. There is a number of affiliations that both of us have. These views that I'll express here, the proposal should not be attributed to any of these organizations. The main impetus for us was, for both Derek and I have independently been working on the challenges that workers face due to income fluctuations having to do with various factors. And when you look at Social Security, Social Security is a basic income replacement in retirement. It is a stabilizing force in retirement. And the need for that kind of stabilization has increased over time. In particular, when you look at sort of the data, sort of three factors seem to stand out, at least for us. The first one is caregiving responsibilities have been going up. People take time out or see their income fluctuate as we have more single-headed households who are parents, but we also have more spouses taking care of either family members of their spouses or older people taking care of family members and other friends. So caregiving is a growing phenomenon, and caregiving responsibilities and the costs associated with that in terms of time demands and resource demands during the working life. The other part is we've seen upward trends over the last 25 years in terms of not the length of unemployment, but also one concern that Derek and I in particular have is the unevenness in terms of the unemployment experience. The rule of thumb that Derek always uses is the unemployment rate, regardless of which demographic groups you're looking at, for African Americans tends to be twice as high as that for whites. And clearly, that seems to be a persistent problem that hasn't gone away. And then the other thing is that we've noticed in recent research is income mobility is declining. The need for more education, more skill development is increasing. All of these three factors, as people take on more caregiving responsibilities, as people lose their jobs, are unemployed for longer spells, and as people have sort of incentives to leave the labor force, to seek training, to get more education, means that they're losing earnings, they're cutting earnings, which means also they're losing credits towards Social Security. And our proposals are meant to counter these three factors. I will specifically suggest these changes. We'll describe them very quickly, present some numbers. There is one short slide that shows a few numbers, and I'll explain why I only have one slide in a second, largely because and then I'll conclude with some additional thoughts on where our proposal sort of fits in the larger scheme of things. The reason why, when you look at the paper, and I'm not sure when the paper is coming out or whether it is out, you will see sort of our proposals in some raise poverty a little bit. They're very targeted towards sort of at the bottom 10 decile, bottom quintile, in terms of raising benefits for two reasons. The first one is most of these benefit changes, especially the caregiving credit, is phased in our proposal. We just designed it that way. The other reason is that most of us aren't caregivers. Most of us aren't unemployed. Most of us aren't in work training. So when you look at averages, even in subgroups, you're not raising the averages that much. Obviously, these benefit improvements that we suggest will be meaningful for people who are caregivers, who are experienced unemployment, and who are going through job training. But in terms of the average numbers, the simulations that we get from the urban institutes, they don't change. Like, we think they're important updates to Social Security, but in a targeted way, but they don't necessarily change the overall picture. It's not like we're doubling the benefits or something like this. So the first proposal we have, this also means like you're going to be looking at this slide for a long time. The first one is we propose that people would earn a credit for caring for a family member or friend starting in 2018. A worker can earn credits towards Social Security benefits as long as they're caring for somebody at least 20 hours a week. This includes children up to the age of 10, as well as ailing family members and friends. We suggest that somebody can earn credits up to 3 years of caregiving. In a married couple, each spouse can independently earn them, but not at the same time. And we propose that the credit, that basically Social Security will be credited at 60% of the average wage index, as long as, and we say like people can earn the credit and earn some money at the same time. So they would earn at least 60% of a credit equal to at least 60% of the average wage index. If they have earnings that are above 60%, then it sort of gradually, it adds a little bit up to the minimum that you get is sort of a bump of 5% in the earnings that are credited towards Social Security. There's a little formula at the back of the paper how we do this. But we also have an adjustment for people who already receive Social Security benefits, that they get a credit. Basically, we suggest that SSA goes back and then recalculates the benefits, taking out 0 years from the calculations. In large part, the reason for us doing that was the phenomenon of grandparenting, which is a widespread phenomenon, especially among Asian Americans and African Americans, but an increasing phenomenon. And we wanted to be sure that as people, for whatever reason, leave the labor force earlier than to take on caregiving responsibilities for family members, especially grandkids, are caught under our proposal. One of the things we wrestled with is, well, how do we make sure that this actually gets implemented? And we basically said, like, just do what you're doing with taking business expenses. We list the number of documentations that people need to keep. Then on a tax form, they would say, I was a caregiver, and that would go to SSA, and they would get the credit. The second part, I have to rush because I'm getting already the time sign here. The second proposal is we suggest credits for people while they're receiving unemployment insurance benefits. We talked to a number of people who are experts on unemployment benefits and unemployment insurance to see whether we can widen the circle to give it to people who are out of work, looking for a job, but can't get, for whatever reason, don't qualify for unemployment insurance benefits. For us, there was no practical way of making that happen. So this does sort of shrink the circle of beneficiaries from our proposal. And finally, we propose that people receive credits while they're going through approved certified job trainings, such as Jobs Corps. Again, in that case, the agency would, or the administrator of the program would just simply certify that somebody was in job training during that time, and they would get credit for that. I wanted to highlight a few issues with all of our proposal. The first one is we wanted to make sure that the proposals were as progressive as possible. So we raised the bottom as much as possible when we designed the credits. Second, we wanted to make it as easy administratively as possible. We didn't want to have sort of a huge burden of paperwork coming to people to document and go through filings to receive the extra credits. We believe, we talk a little bit about in the paper about the unintended consequences of people one of the concerns that people usually have is if you do something like this, what's the effect on the labor supply? Well, if it shrinks the labor supply, that means that people are caregivers for longer. That means that people are seeking training longer. That's not necessarily a bad thing. We also think the effects would be relatively small. AARP asked us in the proposal and said, like, okay, well, how would you pay for it? We don't spend too much time in the paper for it, but we basically say tax capital incomes over $250,000 at a reduced rate, which is sort of something that we always wanted, and we thought one of the proposals here would actually talk about that, but that I think is something I'm happy to defend in the Q&A. And finally, this is the benefit changes in 2065, so when the proposal is, when everything is fully phased in, you sort of have the first generation of people who really would have worked under the proposals. What you see is it's well targeted. It raises the benefits, especially lower income people. Women would receive an increase of 2%, divorced people an increase of 4.7%, African Americans an increase of 2.3%, people without a high school degree of 3.1%. These are higher than for other comparable groups, but again, I think the averages are sort of misleading in the sense that these are targeted small updates to Social Security, but important updates, obviously, for the people who receive the credits while they're taking on these, while they either suffer from the ups and downs in the labor market through unemployment or as they're taking on responsibilities, increasing responsibilities for caregiving, for family members and friends. Importantly, and we make that point also in the paper, and I think a number of other panelists have, this is not the end-all and be-all to changing Social Security benefits. We see this as complementary to other things, both in terms of Social Security benefits, but also to, especially in the caregiving world, complementary to contemporaneous benefits. Nobody is going to necessarily say, like, oh, I'm going to be a caregiver because I'm going to get extra credits because Christian has said so. But clearly, we have to change the way we think about caregiving responsibilities in an aging society with an increasing number of single-headed households. This is only part of the package. And I think for us, and especially in the caregiving side, updating Social Security is one part of addressing the challenge of caregiving in the American society. Increasing caregiving benefits through other social insurance mechanisms would be another way to go. And with that, I'm at the end of my talk. Thank you very much.
All right, so I'm going to apologize for my voice. I have a little bit of a cold, so I've got my water up here in case I need it. I'll start with housekeeping. First, I want to thank my co-authors, Mark Friedman and Jim Emmerman. They know a lot, working at Encore, about people going back to education and doing things later in life, and were a huge help to me. I also want to put another caveat, and I'm going to throw this on to Gary's presentation because he reminded me that he forgot to say it, which is that AARP isn't endorsing either his or my proposals. While we work there, these are our own proposals with our co-authors. So let's start by thinking about a magic elixir. What if I told you that there was a pill that could decrease your unemployment. It could increase your earnings. It would increase your life expectancy, improve your health, and lower your risk of dementia. Sounds good. Well, education does exactly that. If we look at the education impact on unemployment, it's huge. For workers with less than a high school education, the current average unemployment rate is about 7.4%. While those of us who have a bachelor's degree, it's about 2.4%. And since we have many PhDs in the room, it's only about 1.6% for people with a doctoral degree. Education also impacts earnings. For those with less than a high school education, they earn on average about $500 a week. For those with a bachelor, it's about $1,100, and us doctorates get about $1,600 a week, a huge difference in salary. A recent University of Edinburgh study said that 1 year in education adds an additional 11 months of life expectancy. That's higher than other studies that I've seen, but just think about it for the year that you're going to school. I know Matt Burr's in school right now. He can basically just tick off an additional 11 months of living. And further, we know that it affects our health. And interestingly, a study showed that 1 year of education reduces our risk factor for dementia by 11%. Okay, so how does this relate to my proposal? Most people don't continue their education later in life. I think one of the reasons that they don't is not just because of the high cost of education, but also because they have bills to pay. They have to pay their rent, or mortgage. They have to pay their car payments. They have to eat. So my proposal is a way to provide income support during that period of work through the Social Security program. And so let me talk a little bit about that. And I just realized I grabbed my wrong notes. So Bill, can you hand me that little slides? Thank you. If you wanted to hear me close out, I could have read those ones. Okay. So the other reason that I have this proposal is because the economy changes over our work lives. People are living longer, working longer, but many jobs and careers disappear. So we can't all be the same career that used to exist in the 1950s. Ooh, this is tricky. There we go. Because most people started working when it was Mad Men era, and today we have the Jetsons. If you look at the Fortune 500 list from 1955, only 12% of companies are still around today. And so we have a structural change in our economy as well. And so if we think about the risks of Social Security protection with regards to longevity, with regards to survivors' benefits, with regard to disability, actually adding insurance components with regard to structural changes is also not too far of a stretch for the program. Now, there are workforce programs, trade adjustment assistance, others, but there's not one that really generally applies across the population. And so my proposal provides this ability to withdraw Social Security credits for people that are fully insured. So to be clear, this isn't a program for my teenage daughter who's about to go to college, but you have to have 40 quarters of coverage, which for most workers is about 10 years if they're working full-time. Further, it's income replacement. So you get your Social Security benefit calculated at the DI rate, which is what a worker would get, which is about $14,000. That's not going to cover your tuition. But again, if we look at the basic necessities of life, that may allow workers, particularly using the progressivity of the income of the benefit formula, may allow low-income workers the opportunity to go back to school. We do apply the earnings test so that people can't double dip, work and add their Social Security benefit on top of it. And we use existing systems. We use the Veterans Administration, which already has the capacity to check whether people are in schools and at accredited institutions. Now, we could shrink the number of institutions that you're allowed to take benefits from and have the list to perhaps take out for-profit institutions where there's been a lot of research showing that the benefits to those types of education are lower. Those are easy tweaks to do once this benefit is pulled together. We've capped the benefit level at just 2 years. So you can't take benefits for longer than 2 years. We did that because according to the SIP, that was the average, the PSID. Most people who go back to school return for about a year in order to get a certificate. So it's not, so I also came up with 2 ways to pay for this benefit. One is a time shifting. For each month that you take the benefit while you're working, you delay your Social Security early eligibility and your normal retirement age for that same month. So if I take a year of my Social Security lifelong learning benefit, then my early retirement age would be 63 for me personally, and my full retirement age would be 68, and the benefits would be adjusted accordingly. Alternatively, you can have people not pay back in this way with the time their Social Security benefits. And we asked the Urban Institute to model both ways of the proposal. So let me just put together a couple other slides. One is to show that for those who actually do education and training during their work lives, it does improve their earnings over time. And so this is Karen and Melissa's meticulous work to figure out that, yes, there is a benefit of going back to school. We also think there could be benefits for job retraining and that you might be able to work to move into a job that was less physically demanding. We know that 45% of workers aged 58 and over work in physically demanding job. And so if you could get a certificate so that you weren't standing on your feet and perhaps sitting at a nice desk like many of us do, that could be a huge benefit. Or you could work in an industry that perhaps allowed more flexibility. We think that this type of a program allows people more choices overall. The next slide I will show you. Is that the benefit itself isn't taken by many people. If you look at current populations that actually go back to job retraining, it's right now about less than 1% of all people 30 and over actually do return to school. And so Urban assumed a pretty small percentage of people that would actually take up this benefit. But we do see that there is a slight delay in the claiming behavior for both different options. So people are earning more and they're staying in the workforce longer. Importantly, both options have a slight, and I'm going to say teeny weeny is probably the right word, improvement in overall solvency, because higher earnings because of additional education means you're paying more in taxes, and that helps the overall solvency of the program. It raises teeny weeny net productivity in the economy. So I really want to thank Karen and Melissa and the entire team. They said that mine was one of the most difficult programs to estimate, and they did an exceptional job. Again, I think its benefits are that we can really rethink our life course, where right now most everybody gets their education in their first 20 years, works for the next 40 plus years, and then retires. I think we have a dynamic economy in which people are going to need continual retraining, and having a system that provides income replacement so that people of all incomes can go back to school, get the certificates that they choose, and have a way to still pay their rent can be incredibly important. And while it's not an overall solvency package, it does minor, teeny weeny, help the overall solvency of the program. So thank you.
So while you all are thinking of what questions you'd like to ask, I will pose one, and that is, now that you have put forth your innovative thinking, there's likely to be pushback from some quarters. So from whom would you expect to receive pushback, and how would you overcome that?
I'll start off, and I should have mentioned some problems with my proposal before anybody else did. One is if we do the payment where you have to pay back your own time, we're assuming that people can have jobs later in life. And that's not always true. Some people hit 62, have been out of work or in a physically demanding job, even with this innovation, and would have a hard time if they had taken 2 years earlier in life, and now have to wait till 64 before they qualify for benefits. So I do think we have to worry about some share of the population that go take an education. Maybe there's some philosophy folks in the room, not to pick on you, but and that education didn't provide them with long-term job stability, and that allows them that actually had a negative impact on them later in their careers. So again, the no payback wouldn't have that same problems.
Let me see. I think sort of the one typical big pushback doesn't really necessarily apply to ours, and that is we're raising the cost of Social Security and making the solvency issue worse. This is a small proposal; it doesn't do much, and on the benefit side. In terms of other pushbacks, I think we have to address generally the challenges that the labor market brings with it, and I think most people are at least aware of sort of the biggest challenge, and this is sort of the biggest effect in our proposal, and that is on the caregiving side. And I think regardless of where you are in a partisan divide, I think both conservatives and progressives are aware of the caregiving challenges and that we need to do more for caregivers, especially as in the caregiving world, we're shifting more and more from institutionalized care, especially, I mean, the biggest growth in caregiving is elder care, and there we're shifting from institutional care to family care and informal care. And I think both conservatives and progressives are wrestling with it. I think sort of the biggest criticism would probably come from some of our progressive friends that we're not going far enough, that we're limiting, for instance, the years of caregiving, that we're limiting the age for children, and so on and so forth. But again, modifying the proposal to add more years of caregiving or raising the age of a child, for instance, for which you can care, would have small effects for Social Security, but would have large effects for the caregivers.
And now you.
Thank you. This is a question for Deb. I think the proposal is really interesting, in part because another project I'm doing, there's this change in the distribution of people obtaining post-secondary education. It's older. So you see this growing fraction of people age 35 and older who are doing that. So I think it's super interesting. What I was curious about is what you think this does in terms of broadening the scope of what Social Security as a social insurance program is doing. I suspect that was some of your thinking behind this, but I'd just like to hear what you have to say about it.
So I have to say, and some of that worries me because I think we can add tons of bells and whistles onto the Social Security program that could weigh it down for somebody that believes very strongly in the program. That said, I think it's a very highly functioning program that meets the needs of many, many people. And that has holes and gaps. Christian talked about several of them where if you have unpaid labor and are helping to take care of a loved one, be it a child or an adult, you don't get benefits for your retirement. I thought about it as an efficiency because I look at all issues of aging as part of my role and have been thinking a lot about this life course issue of people needing to continue to remain fresh and educated, if you think about the fact that the iPhone came out just 10 years ago, and we have entire industries and companies that never existed before, that if you want to get into, you actually do need some more education. This is a solution that for the larger problem that relies on an existing system that is pretty efficient. It's very progressive. And it also, again, doesn't target childhood education, and it doesn't deal with the price of college, which I think is a huge issue, but it at least allows a fair playing field for people to think about that opportunity. We didn't estimate the impacts on the unemployment rate, but I also think, again, if people exit the labor force, realize they need to get more skills, do that, it actually takes some money off of that. So we can think about other ways, perhaps through savings of other programs, in order to make this stronger. But I was using the efficiency of the current system we have rather than trying to build a whole new system.
I know the question wasn't for me, but I'll take the mic anyway. Thank you. Because to some degree, this can apply, if, at least in theory, to caregiving, to unemployment. People are still part of the labor force and workforce training. The important part is most caregivers are still working. They don't advance in their careers, but basically to take on a second job. With workforce training, I think we have to realize that when people take extra education or undergo workforce training programs, they're doing that in order to stay in the labor force, to be effective. They don't do this just so they'll have a better life in retirement or on the beach or whatever. So I think all of the proposals from Deb and us still keep Social Security as an earned benefit tied to your labor force participation and address the realities of a changing workforce, the demands on workers from all sides, from the jobs, from caregiving, from families, from friends, are changing, and Social Security has to change with that.
Other questions?
Hello, my name is Delmer Hoskins. Question for Deb, but I think it may also apply to Christian's proposal, and that is the instance when they're not paying back, right? The second alternative, what happens to their Social Security benefits, and is there any reduction or?
Easy question. Thank you, Delmer.
Okay.
I appreciate the softball. Nothing happens. So in the second scenario, you took out the 1 month to 2 years worth of benefits, and your benefit, long-term benefit, wasn't affected at all. Again, this had a teeny tiny, again, small population, positive effect on solvency because that population was so small. If lots of people took it and nobody had to pay it back, then there might be an effect on solvency that we'd have to think about. But I thank the Urban Institute for holding us honest and really checking to see what the impact would be.
Well, we don't have a payback option. I just want to use this as an opportunity to clarify something. What we're proposing is a credit towards Social Security benefits while you're caregiving. There was a round of proposals a few years ago to actually do something similar to what Deb is proposing, to allow people to get money from Social Security while caring. I generally think, given the challenges that we're facing as a country, the demands we have as a society for caregiving, that should be a separate benefit. That should be a separate social insurance benefit. Whatever that is, paid family caregiving, such as we have in California or something like that. But that is a separate benefit and should not be part of Social Security, at least in my view at this point.
I'm John Turner. I have a question actually for both speakers, Christian and Debra. Something that interests me, when you look around the world, many countries have early retirement ages which differ based on how many years you've worked. And so what intrigued me about your proposal, Debra, is that you have an early retirement age that is higher for some people than for other people, based on your proposal. And so my question is, what would you think is a different proposal, but in a way combines aspects of both of yours? What would you think of having a proposal that would raise the early retirement age for people with long careers in conjunction with Christian giving people with caregiving zeros credit for those years?
So I just want to be clear. So you raise the early retirement age if you had a long career or if you had a short career? Thank you. So I think there's an issue as we raise the normal retirement age. As you know, the reduction for the early eligibility age becomes more and more and more. And I worry about the adequacy of that amount. But I think I worry more about the people that can't work longer. And so, just because you had a short work life doesn't mean you're physically able to work until you're 63, 64, 65. And so one of the things that I'm always hypersensitive to is those people that had maybe short, brutal careers.
Yeah, I got nothing to add here. Thank you.
Well, that's it for us in terms of time, so please help me thank our panelists.